You're pathetic. Donald Trump spits the words across the room, his smirk daring anyone to challenge him. Jasmine Crockett doesn't flinch, not in front of 3,000 journalists, not under the eyes of 535 members of Congress, not with 150 million Americans watching live. She's about to expose lies that span decades, secrets hidden in plain sight, and corruption that cost billions. Trump laughs, but the room is tense. Every second, every heartbeat, every glance is a countdown to a confrontation that could change history. And in this chamber, justice is not just a word, it's a battle. The doors of the grand hearing room swung open with a measured authority, echoing through the marble halls. Every footstep, every shuffle of papers, every whisper carried the weight of history. This wasn't just a room, it was a battlefield, a stage where power, truth, and consequence collided. The chamber smelled of polished wood, aged paper, and something indefinably tense, the scent of a storm about to break. Cameras lined every balcony, every corner, capturing every angle, every expression, every twitch of a finger. Globally, millions were watching in real time. The flashes of cameras stuttered like lightning in a tempest, reflecting off the polished surfaces and glinting off the eyes of those present. Reporters adjusted microphones, scribbled notes furiously, and whispered among themselves in a hum of anticipation. No one dared blink. Then the door at the far end opened again, and there he was, Donald Trump. His presence commanded attention before a word was even spoken. He walked with a deliberate swagger, a smirk curling on his lips, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of challenge and amusement. Confidence radiated off him in waves, a persona perfected over decades of media, power, and spectacle. It was as if he had already won, already predicted every argument, every accusation, every gasp of the crowd. He didn't just enter the room, he entered with the certainty of a man who believed he could bend reality to his will. But then came Jasmine Crockett. She entered quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Yet the energy she carried was undeniable. Her gaze was sharp, focused, burning with a fire that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Every eye in the room turned toward her, not because she sought attention, but because she radiated authority, morality, and an unyielding resolve. She did not flinch under the glare of cameras, the whispers of doubters, or the intimidating aura of the man opposite her. The contrast between them could not have been more stark. Trump's arrogance filled the space like an overbearing shadow, while Jasmine's determination shone like a piercing beam of light cutting through the darkness. Observers could almost feel the invisible tension coil and snap between them, a palpable electricity that promised collision, confrontation, and perhaps revelation. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. The murmurs, the clicking of pens, even the shuffling of papers, all faded into silence as the presiding chair cleared his throat. His voice, steady and commanding, broke through the taut air. "Let the hearing begin." And with that, the tension snapped into full force. Like a loaded spring, the room seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Every movement, every glance, every subtle twitch of muscle was amplified by the electric silence. The walls of the chamber, adorned with historical portraits and symbols of governance, bore witness to a confrontation that would be etched into memory. Trump's eyes glinted with the thrill of performance. He leaned back slightly, fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm against the polished surface of the table. His smirk remained, but beneath it, there was an imperceptible tightening around his jaw, a flicker of awareness that this battle might not be as rehearsed, as controlled, as he had imagined. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the table, steady, unshaking, her lips pressed into a line, not of fear, but of unwavering determination. She inhaled once, deeply, letting the gravity of the moment center her. Around her, the chamber seemed to shrink, focusing every ounce of energy, every heartbeat, every thought into the singular purpose of this moment: justice. Outside the room, millions of eyes were fixed on screens, unaware of the minute shifts in posture, the tension in the shoulders, the subtle inhalation that preludes action. Yet the sense of immediacy, of imminent confrontation, was undeniable even through the glow of television and digital streams. Viewers could feel it, the storm that had been brewing for years, condensed into a single room, a single hearing, a single collision between the ideals of justice and the arrogance of unchecked power. And then the first words were spoken, not yet questions, not yet accusations, but the small, precise commands of procedure, of order attempting to anchor chaos. Every second stretched, every heartbeat echoed, every eye was riveted on the two figures at the center of it all. In that moment, the chamber was more than wood and stone. It was an arena. And Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump were its champions and challengers, each poised to write history with their decisions, their words, and their courage. The battle lines were drawn, invisible yet undeniable, a test of wit, will, and morality. And for those watching around the world, a simple truth became clear. This wasn't just a hearing. This was a turning point. As the cameras continued to roll and the chamber held its breath, one thought hovered for every viewer, unspoken but unmistakable. What happens next could change everything. So if you want to witness every electrifying second of this battle, every twist, every revelation, and every heart-stopping moment, make sure you're following Harrison Stories channel, because this is just the beginning of a story that will grip you, shock you, and keep you questioning the world around you. And now the real battle began. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat, her movements calm yet deliberate, a subtle declaration that nothing would deter her. She fixed her gaze on Donald Trump, unwavering, and the room seemed to shrink around the intensity of that look. No introductions, no preamble, just a question that cut through the thick, expectant silence. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice steady, precise, "how do you justify decisions that put millions at risk while claiming to act in their best interest?" The words landed like a hammer, each syllable measured, each pause weighted with unspoken accusation. Cameras whirred, reporters froze mid-scribble, and the chamber, which had been buzzing with subdued tension, fell utterly silent. Trump's initial reaction was the familiar smirk, the condescending chuckle that had carried him through so many confrontations. But the smirk faltered. A pause stretched longer than anyone anticipated. Eyes darted, searching for reassurance, for an escape. And for the first time, Trump hesitated. The practiced armor of confidence that had dominated part one wavered just enough to reveal the flicker of uncertainty beneath. The audience, present and global, felt it immediately. This was a crack in the facade. Jasmine pressed on, each question a precisely aimed strike. "Explain why repeated warnings were ignored. Explain why essential relief funds never reached the communities they were meant to help. Explain why transparency became an option only when convenient, rather than a responsibility." Her words echoed through the chamber. The only sound apart from her voice was the rhythmic tap of her pen against her notes, a subtle, relentless metronome that marked the passage of truth through lies and accountability through evasion. Each tap punctuated the weight of her questions, amplifying their impact. Trump leaned back, trying to recover, opening his mouth to speak, but the words seemed caught somewhere between instinct and calculation. The smirk wavered. His eyes flickered nervously, betraying the tension he tried so hard to conceal. The room, sensing the shift, held its collective breath. She continued without pause. "Your claims of economic triumph, how do you reconcile them with the millions left behind, the promises broken, the communities in ruin? Were they collateral damage in your pursuit of power?" Every phrase was a scalpel, exposing vulnerability, unraveling pretense. Journalists scribbled frantically, cameras followed every minute movement, and viewers at home could feel the crackle of tension as though it leapt through the screen. Trump tried diversion. He chuckled, waved a hand, leaned toward an aide, but Jasmine anticipated each deflection. Her gaze never wavered, her pen never stopped tapping. Her presence alone became a force that demanded truth, that cornered arrogance and forced it into the light. The chamber seemed suspended in that moment, a taut string waiting to snap. Trump's smirk faded entirely, replaced by a subtle flush of anger creeping across his face. He leaned forward, voice low and controlled, attempting to regain authority. Watch your tone. I know. But the edge in his words betrayed him. The carefully constructed composure that had once shielded him from criticism was cracking, and everyone sensed it. This was the first tangible sign that Jasmine's relentless questioning had struck where it hurt most: confidence and ego. The audience, both inside the chamber and across the globe, could feel it. The tide of the hearing had shifted. Every subtle glance, every slight movement, every breath drawn in the room carried the weight of a duel now fully engaged. Jasmine allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Not of triumph, but of recognition. She had delivered the first strike, and it had landed. Trump's hands curled into fists on the polished table. His jaw tightened. His voice, when it returned, carried tension previously unseen, a low, strained gnarling that contrasted sharply with the arrogance of the earlier smirk. It was a glimpse of vulnerability, a fissure for all to see, and the chamber responded with a collective intake of breath, the atmosphere crackling with anticipation. The first volley had been fired, and as Trump's voice rose in restrained fury, Jasmine's calm, unwavering presence made clear that this was only the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and the world, every single viewer, every journalist, every person tuned into this historic moment, was now fully engaged, witnessing the collision of power and principle, ego and justice. Trump leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with a mixture of irritation and calculation. He had felt the sting of Jasmine's first strike, the subtle tremor of control slipping from his grasp. And now it was time to turn the tide with a weapon he knew well: words. A smirk spread across his face, the same smirk that had carried him through decades of confrontations. "Oh, look at you," he said, imitating her tone, his voice dripping with mockery. "So serious, so righteous. Do you really think this little crusade of yours is going to change anything?" The chamber stiffened. His words, casual and contemptuous, carried a sharper edge than any accusation. Trump's supporters in the room chuckled, a ripple of laughter that grew louder as they encouraged the taunt. The sound was contagious, the atmosphere thickening with hostility, a subtle, toxic energy feeding off arrogance and power. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, not for a moment. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering, like a laser slicing through the smoke of deflection. She leaned forward slightly, her hand resting lightly on the table, and with a calmness that made the room tremble in anticipation, she spoke. "Mock me all you want, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "But the truth doesn't bend to your performance, and neither will justice." The chamber froze. A single electric silence followed her words, amplified by the hundreds of cameras capturing every reaction. Even Trump's chuckle faltered. For the first time, the room sensed that this wasn't a simple exchange of insults. It was a duel of minds, of strategies, of wills. He tried again, louder, sharper. "You really think anyone cares about your righteous indignation? It's laughable. People see through you." He leaned forward, mimicking her gestures, exaggerating her posture with a sardonic flair. His supporters erupted into laughter once more, a chorus of derision echoing off the chamber walls. But Jasmine's calm didn't waver. She let the laughter wash over her, untouching, and then delivered a single line that sent a shockwave through the room. "People care because truth matters more than your theatrics, and courage matters more than your fear of being exposed." The effect was instantaneous. The laughter died mid-chuckle. Whispers of astonishment threaded through the chamber. Journalists shifted in their seats, their pens poised, their eyes wide. Even some of Trump's allies faltered, uncertain, as the weight of her words landed with precision and authority. For the next several minutes, the exchange escalated into a chess match of rhetoric. Trump would jab, Jasmine would parry, he would twist words, distort intent, draw on personal insinuations. She would counter with clarity, logic, and the unassailable power of evidence. Every sentence, every syllable, felt magnified by the tension in the room, charged with anticipation, a dangerous game with stakes higher than either could openly admit. The chamber became an arena of intellect and nerve. Every smirk, every raised eyebrow, every deliberate pause was a move in an invisible game, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Trump's mockery and mimicry were met by Jasmine's unwavering poise, a mirror reflecting back his theatrics without distortion. Audience members leaned forward in their seats. Millions of viewers at home whispered into empty rooms, caught up in the silent pulse of the duel. Comments scrolled on social media, debates ignited, opinions shifted, because this wasn't just politics. It was performance, spectacle, and revelation all at once. Trump's voice began to carry tension beneath the mockery. His words lost some of their casual arrogance, tinged now with frustration. He tried to reclaim the upper hand by turning to personal jabs, references to past missteps, even vague insinuations meant to shake Jasmine's composure. But she didn't waver. Each attack bounced off her like rain off steel. Her eyes held him in place, her voice never rising beyond measured authority. And when she finally spoke again, the room seemed to shiver with the force of her calm. You can imitate me, twist words, try to intimidate, but all you do is reveal how little control you truly have over the truth. The statement hit like a thunderclap. A hush fell over the chamber. Even the supportive laughter of Trump's allies was stifled, muted by the undeniable power of her presence and her words. By the time the first round of verbal sparring ended, it was clear. This was not a hearing. It was a war of minds, and Jasmine Crockett had just proven she would not be bullied or silenced. She had struck first with clarity, precision, and moral force, and Trump, for the first time in the hearing, showed cracks in his armor. And the world was watching, captivated, aware that this battle of words was far more consequential than anyone could have imagined. Jasmine Crockett's eyes scanned the chamber with an unwavering calm, and then slowly, deliberately, she reached into the folder before her and pulled out the first set of documents. The paper rustled like distant thunder, a subtle sound that carried a tremor of anticipation through the room. She laid them carefully on the table, aligning them so every eye could see their significance. This, she said, her voice steady but resonant, is the evidence that has been withheld for years, the truth that was buried beneath layers of deception. The papers were stamped, coded, marked in red, yellow, and black. They were internal communications, memos, and confidential reports, documents that revealed discrepancies, mismanagement, and decisions that directly contradicted public statements. Each page was a revelation, a mirror reflecting actions that millions had only suspected but never seen laid bare. Trump's initial reaction was almost imperceptible, a subtle blanch, a fleeting flash of alarm across his features. But he recovered quickly, his voice sharp and rehearsed. "Fake news," he spat, the words carrying a brittle confidence that tried to mask the shock beneath. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to regain the composure of a man untouchable, untarnished by scandal. Yet the documents themselves spoke louder than any declaration. Every senator, every journalist, every aide in the room leaned closer, their eyes flicking between Jasmine's calm determination and the stack of papers that had just transformed the atmosphere. Even Trump's allies felt the shift, a subtle unease creeping in as the undeniable weight of evidence settled over them. For the neutral members of Congress, those who had remained cautiously observing, their posture began to change. Heads tilted, pens paused mid-note, eyes narrowed. The initial defenses against partisan bias softened as the documents commanded their attention. The chamber was no longer a place of ritualized performance. It had become a theater of truth, and the performance was inescapable. Jasmine's hands moved deliberately, presenting page after page, her voice unflinching, narrating the implications with clarity that cut through the fog of political maneuvering. Here you see the correspondence that contradicts public statements. Here are financial allocations that were mismanaged, withheld, or diverted. Here are the directives that endangered lives despite repeated warnings. Each revelation landed like a drumbeat in the chamber. Journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every nuance. Cameras focused on the reactions, some subtle, some dramatic. And through it all, Trump's confidence began to fray. His smirk, once a shield, now seemed brittle, forced, unable to hide the tension curling beneath. A faint whisper ran through the chamber as members exchanged glances. The air, already thick with anticipation, seemed to solidify into something almost tangible, heavy in charge. Every breath taken felt like inhaling the weight of impending judgment. Even the rhythmic clicking of Jasmine's pen seemed amplified, an echo of inevitability that underscored the gravity of the moment. Trump leaned forward, voice tight, trying again to dominate the narrative. These documents are fabricated, entirely fabricated. You can't trust anything here. But Jasmine did not flinch. She placed her hand on the folder again, sliding it closer to the center of the table, as if daring him to confront the evidence head-on. Fabricated? She replied, her tone unwavering. Every mark, every stamp, every signature has been verified by multiple independent sources. The truth isn't dependent on belief. It exists whether you accept it or not. The chamber went silent again, the kind of silence that presses into bones, that makes every heartbeat sound louder than usual. Even Trump's allies, who had laughed and cheered through previous exchanges, now shifted uncomfortably. Their laughter stifled, their expressions tight. They were forced to reckon with the reality Jasmine had brought to the table. Outside, millions of viewers watched, riveted, some shaking their heads, some leaning closer to their screens. Social media erupted, debates ignited, and every comment, every share, carried the echo of the chamber's tension. People could feel the weight of the evidence, the undeniable proof laid bare in front of millions of eyes. Trump's jaw tightened, his posture rigid, his hands clenching the edge of the table. For the first time, he seemed contained not by strategy or arrogance, but by the undeniable force of truth. Jasmine, poised, calm, and resolute, met his gaze without blinking. She had delivered the first wave of revelation, and it was enough to shake the foundations of certainty he had relied upon. The chamber's atmosphere was electric, each moment taut with suspense. Every observer, every journalist, every senator knew they were witnessing history unfold in real time, a confrontation between the weight of evidence and the walls of arrogance. And as Jasmine carefully stacked the documents, letting their significance resonate through the room, she offered a final, quiet but commanding reminder. The story wasn't over, and the pursuit of justice would continue with precision, integrity, and unrelenting force. For those captivated by the unfolding drama, eager to witness the next revelation, every twist, every exposure, make sure to stay connected and follow Harrison Stories channel, where the story continues to shock, intrigue, and keep you questioning everything you thought you knew. And then, like a storm breaking loose, the chamber convulsed. Donald Trump's composure, already fraying, snapped in an instant. His hands slammed against the polished oak table with such ferocity that pens rattled and papers scattered like startled birds. The sound cracked through the chamber, sharp and violent, and in its wake came his roar. "You are a traitor," he bellowed, each word spat with venom. "A traitor to this country, a traitor to its people, a traitor to the office I held." The room exploded in chaos. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Reporters surged forward, flashes strobing as cameras tried to freeze the fury on his face. Senators twisted in their seats, aides exchanged panicked whispers, and journalists scrambled to capture every syllable. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of outrage, disbelief, and raw adrenaline. And yet, at the epicenter of this storm, Jasmine Crockett stood still, calm, unwavering, a figure of steel against the crashing waves of noise. Her eyes locked onto Trump's with quiet fire, her voice cutting through the bedlam like a blade. "You can yell. You can slam tables. You can accuse me of treason." Her words rose, steady and sharp. "But you cannot bury the truth. You cannot silence the facts, and you will not drown justice in noise." The chamber froze, suspended for a heartbeat. The power in her tone held the room captive. Even Trump's closest loyalists faltered, their rehearsed laughter dying at their lips, their bravado cracking under the sheer force of her calm defiance. Trump's chest heaved, veins bulging at his temples. His growl dropped low, guttural, laced with menace. "You'll regret this. You don't know what you're playing with. You don't understand who you're up against." Jasmine leaned forward, resting her hands on the stack of documents she had revealed earlier, a silent reminder of the evidence that now loomed like a shadow over the chamber. Her voice rang clear, resonant with conviction. "I know exactly what I'm up against. Lies, corruption, a desperate attempt to twist fear into power. But truth does not bend, it does not break, and no amount of rage can silence it. A palpable shift swept the room. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with the gravity of the moment. Every lens, every microphone, every eye was trained on the standoff, on the tremor in Trump's fingers as he gripped the table, on the steadiness of Jasmine's gaze that refused to yield. Trump's fury burst again. He slammed the table once more, this time sending a folder of papers tumbling to the floor in a chaotic flutter. How dare you? How dare you question me, undermine me, humiliate me in front of this circus? His voice cracked at the edges, the strain betraying him. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned in, her voice even stronger, each word deliberate, slicing through his tirade. You can rage, you can threaten, you can try to dominate with fear. But truth speaks louder than your fury. Justice echoes longer than your anger, and the world is watching. Silence followed, thick, suffocating, absolute. Senators shifted uneasily. Reporters hesitated, pens hovering mid-sentence, cameras capturing every fraction of expression. For the first time in the hearing, Trump's dominance faltered. His rage, meant to terrify, had instead unveiled his desperation. This was the eruption, the raw collision of fury against unshakable resolve. The chamber, electric and unrelenting, understood what had just happened. The balance of power had cracked. Courage had faced down ego. Principle had stared intimidation in the eye and won the moment. Every person present felt it. Every viewer watching knew it. The confrontation had changed. And as Trump's breath came in ragged heaves while Jasmine's gaze held steady and unflinching, one truth crystallized for all to see. This was only the beginning of the firestorm. The room shifted, not in noise but in weight. Trump no longer slammed his fist. He leaned back instead, eyes narrowing, calculating. The eruption had passed, but in its place came something far more dangerous, a duel of minds. Jasmine sensed it instantly. This was not about who could shout louder. This was a political chess match. Each question, each word, each pause, a piece moved on the board. Her voice cut through the chamber again, sharp, deliberate. Mr. Trump, you've accused me of treason. Tell us, what treason is it exactly? To demand answers about missing funds? Trump smirked, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve, pretending control. That's the game you play, Jasmine. Twisting facts, making mountains out of molehills. The American people don't want your questions. They want strength. They want me. He dodged. The audience caught it. Twitter feeds lit up. Hashtags spiking in real time. Ernadiner Trump ducks. Jasmine didn't flinch. She pressed forward, her tone tightening like a vice. So you won't answer? Then let's try again. Who signed the authorization for those shadow accounts overseas? Names, Mr. Trump. That's all I'm asking. Murmurs rose across the chamber. Eyes darted. Senators stiffened in their chairs, realizing the spotlight was moving toward them, like pawns suddenly dragged onto the board. Trump's smile thinned. He leaned into the microphone, his voice lower, colder. Do you think the American people care about paperwork? About signatures? They care about jobs, about security? And I gave them both. You gave them nothing but division. Another dodge, another deflection. His words twisted the board, trying to lure the crowd into forgetting the question. But Jasmine wasn't here to be lured. She was here to corner him. She raised a document from her stack, crisp under the fluorescent lights. Jobs? Security? This memo, signed during your administration, directs funds away from veterans' health care into private accounts. Do you deny this signature belongs to you? The room erupted. Senators shifted like restless knights and bishops pulled against their will. Cameras zoomed. Viewers at home typed furiously, comments streaming in. She's got him. Sanan, look at his face. Trump leaned back, chuckling, but it was hollow. Another forgery, another witch hunt. You people have been forging documents since 2016. Nothing sticks, nothing ever will. The laughter faltered as quickly as it came. His words rang defensive, his tone brittle. The board trembled. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady, her eyes never blinking. If it's a forgery, Then why does this document bear the watermark of the Department of Defense? Why does it match 3 other memos entered into evidence today? You can deny my questions, Mr. Trump, but can you deny the seal of your own government? Gasps. The chamber's collective inhale was sharp, almost painful. Trump's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, a flicker too quick to hide, he was caught, and Jasmine pressed harder, like a queen striking down the king's last defense. You accuse me of treason, yet here we see betrayal not in words but in signatures, in transfers, in actions that stripped resources from those who serve this nation. Tell us, Mr. Trump, what greater treason exists than to turn your back on your own soldiers? The chamber froze. The world watching froze. For the first time, Donald Trump had no words. His lips moved, but no sound came. His hand twitched toward the papers scattered across the table, as if searching for a shield that wasn't there. And Jasmine Crockett, steady as stone, did not look away. The game of wits had reached its breaking point. The board had shifted, and the world had just witnessed the unthinkable. Donald Trump silenced. The silence was unbearable. Seconds stretched like hours, and in those breaths of stillness, the chamber seemed to hold its own heartbeat. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed, and a massive screen flickered to life behind the committee. The audience stirred, every camera turned. A video began to play. Not an edited clip, not a partisan highlight, but raw footage, grainy, time-stamped, undeniable. It showed a closed-door meeting. Trump seated at the head of the table, his voice unmistakable, his tone casual, almost careless. And then the words, "Move the funds. Don't worry about the veterans. They'll never notice. Just make it look official." The chamber exploded. Gasps collided with shouts. Some senators bolted upright in outrage. Others clapped their hands over their mouths. Half the room roared in approval, vindicated. The other half erupted in fury, loyalists shouting, "Fake! Manipulated!" Journalists nearly fell over one another to capture the moment. Phones shot into the air, live streams spiking across the globe. Within minutes, hashtags stormed every platform. Trump exposed. Veterans betrayed. Crockett v. Trump. And Donald Trump, Donald J. Trump, master of performance, master of control, sat frozen. His eyes darted, his jaw clenched. For the first time, his mask of confidence shattered entirely. 5 seconds of silence. 10, 15, it was an eternity. And then he exploded. "This is an ambush!" Trump roared, his fists slamming against the table so hard the microphones rattled. "This is political theater, a setup, a scam. That video is fake. It's doctored. It's a disgrace to this country." His voice cracked under the strain, desperation bleeding through the fury. Jasmine Crockett did not move. She sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on him, the very picture of calm in the storm. Her silence screamed louder than any accusation. The audience split like a battlefield. Cheers clashed with boos, every word Trump shouted feeding the chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes lit the chamber like lightning, but Trump wasn't finished. "You people think you can destroy me with lies? With CGI videos cooked up in some dark room?" His face reddened, sweat glistening under the harsh lights. "This is a witch hunt, the biggest witch hunt in American history. And you," he pointed a trembling finger at Jasmine, "you are nothing but a pawn in their sick game." His words cracked like thunder, but they didn't land the way they once had. Too many had heard the tape. Too many had seen his lips move, his voice flow seamlessly from the screen. The evidence was there, playing on repeat in their minds. And that was when Jasmine struck, her words cold and steady, slicing through the uproar like a blade. "If it's fake, Mr. Trump, then why is your own legal counsel sitting 2 rows behind you on camera in that very same meeting?" Every head turned. There he was, Trump's former attorney, pale as chalk, his eyes fixed on the table. The room detonated again. Trump flailed, voice rising, pitch cracking. "It's a conspiracy. It's all coordinated. The deep state, the media, the Democrats. You're all in on this. They can make anyone look guilty. Anyone. But the more he shouted, the less control he had. The contrast was stark, unavoidable. Trump, red-faced, raging, drowning in his own fury. Jasmine, poised, unflinching, her very silence commanding more authority than his tirades. The world was watching. Millions of viewers sat glued to their screens. Comment sections overflowing. Some screamed in defense of Trump. Others cried out for accountability. But all were captivated, unable to look away. Because history was unfolding in real time. The first climax had arrived. The mighty had stumbled, the invincible had faltered, and for the first time in years, Donald Trump's voice no longer carried absolute dominance. He pounded the table once more, his face a storm of rage and fear. They will not get away with this. I will not be silenced. I will fight this to the bitter end. But his words, though loud, rang hollow against the echo of his own recorded betrayal. And Jasmine Crockett, with nothing more than a steady gaze, let the weight of truth hang heavy in the air, suffocating, undeniable. The chamber had changed forever, and so had the war. The silence following the video was already suffocating. Every eye locked on Trump, every breath caught in the storm of disbelief. And then, instead of retreating, he went lower, much lower. You talk about truth, Jasmine, Trump sneered, his voice dripping venom. But maybe we should talk about you, about that family of yours, about that mess of a personal life you try to hide. People think you're some kind of saint, but your own past proves otherwise. Gasps shot through the chamber like gunfire. It was no longer political, it was personal. Trump's words weren't aimed at dismantling her argument, but at dismantling her. Whispers rippled across the room. Senators shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others leaning forward to feed on the spectacle. Trump pressed harder, sensing blood. Your family scandals, your so-called struggles, you think they make you strong? No, they make you weak, a disgrace. You stand here pretending to be the voice of justice, but the truth is, you can't even manage your own house. You're pathetic. The chamber recoiled. Even some of his allies frowned, unsettled by the cruelty. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine, searching for cracks, for tears, for any sign that his assault had landed. For a brief moment, it seemed it had. Her hands trembled against the table. Her chest rose and fell, fast and heavy. Her eyes, wide with fury, shimmered. The atmosphere thickened, suffocating. Senators shifted uneasily. A chair scraped loudly against the floor as one member attempted to intervene. Mr. President, that's... But Jasmine raised a hand, stopping them. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat, pulling the anger inward, channeling it. When she opened them again, the fire in her gaze was no longer wild. It was controlled, blazing, unstoppable. Her voice rang out, steady at first, then rising, every word pulsing with righteous fury. You can drag my family through the mud. You can try to weaponize my scars. But here's the truth, Mr. Trump. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. My struggles are not my shame. They are my strength. And unlike you, I don't bury my mistakes behind lies and billions of dollars. I face them. I own them. And I rise from them. The room froze. Every syllable echoed like a hammer striking iron. Jasmine's voice grew louder, sharper, resonating with the weight of countless unheard voices across America. You call me weak because I've known pain? Because I've known loss? No, that's what makes me dangerous to you. Because I can't be broken. And because I fight not for myself, but for every family you've betrayed, every community you've exploited, every life you've dismissed as expendable. The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from her allies, mixed with stunned gasps from those who hadn't expected her counterpunch to cut so deep. Across the nation, viewers sat transfixed, chills racing down their arms. Comment threads exploded. She just destroyed him. This is history. Crockett is unstoppable. Trump slammed his fist again, but this time the sound rang hollow. His words of insult, once weapons, now sounded like desperate flails against an opponent who refused to break. Jasmine leaned back, her breathing heavy, but her eyes never wavering. And then, with a voice that carried like a bell through the storm, she delivered the line that would be replayed, quoted, and etched into history. "You can hurl every insult at me, but the only legacy you'll leave behind is this: fear, corruption, and lies. And today, Mr. Trump, the truth stands taller than you." The chamber exploded, cheers mixed with shouts, but the dominant sound was thunderous applause, echoing like a verdict. Trump's face twisted in rage, but for the second time that day, his voice faltered. He had struck low, and instead of shattering Jasmine, he had elevated her. The dirty tactic had backfired, and Jasmine Crockett, battle-scarred but unbroken, stood stronger than ever. The war was far from over. But in that moment, the scales had tipped, and the nation knew it. The chamber, still vibrating from Jasmine's defiant stand, had barely begun to settle when something unexpected happened. A chair scraped back, then another, and another. One by one, senators who had sat silent for hours rose to their feet. First, a gray-haired Republican with a reputation for caution cleared his throat. His voice shook, but his words cut through the air. "I can't stand by and pretend anymore. The evidence is undeniable, and the American people deserve the truth." Gasps rippled through the room. Allies turned on him, hissing warnings, but he stood tall, papers clutched in his hand. Then another senator, a centrist Democrat, joined him, followed by an independent who had wavered until now. Jasmine's eyes widened, her chest rising with a surge of vindication. She was no longer a lone warrior in the storm. A coalition was forming, fragile yet powerful, right before the cameras of the world. They moved in unison, like pieces on a chessboard suddenly aligning. Documents thudded onto the table, each one a blow. A contract signed in secrecy, a transcript of a phone call laced with threats, financial records that linked hidden donors to shadowy foreign interests. One piece of evidence after another fell like hammers, the rhythm relentless, pounding against Trump's defenses. The once unshakable titan sat slouched in his chair, his face glistening with sweat. His hands gripped the edges of the table, knuckles white, as if holding on could stop the collapse. But it couldn't. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice calm, commanding. "This is not about party. This is not about power. This is about the people we swore to serve. And today, the people demand answers." The coalition echoed her, voices overlapping in a storm of unity. For the first time, Trump wasn't facing a single adversary. He was surrounded. The cameras zoomed in mercilessly, his collar damp with sweat, his jaw twitching, his voice once booming, now cracking under the weight of relentless attack. This is outrageous," Trump stammered, his words stumbling. You're twisting everything. But the stutter betrayed him. His bluster had become brittle. The senators pressed harder, each question sharper than the last. "Why did you sign off on these funds? Who authorized this meeting? What was promised in exchange for silence?" Every answer Trump tried to give crumbled, contradicted by the paper trail piling higher before him. The chamber had become a storm. Reporters shouted over one another, pens flying across notepads, cameras catching every twitch, every falter. And beyond the walls, the world boiled. News anchors broke into programming with urgent updates. Social media exploded with clips of the confrontation, hashtags multiplying by the second. Justice Alliance, Chaker, Trump cornered, Sartor, truth on trial. The weight of history pressed down on every person in the room. Jasmine, standing at the center of it all, felt the energy coursing through her veins. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was channeling the voices of the coalition, of the millions watching, of every American who had ever felt silenced. She pointed at the growing mountain of evidence. "This is not an attack, Mr. Trump. This is accountability. And no matter how loudly you yell, no matter how many insults you hurl, you cannot outshout the truth." The chamber erupted. Some clapped, others screamed in protest, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. Trump wiped his brow with a trembling hand. His voice, once a weapon of dominance, now quivered, thin and uneven. This is treason. You're all traitors, all of you, and you'll pay for this. You'll see. But his threats rang hollow. The walls were closing in. The coalition pressed on, their unity striking like lightning, their rhythm unbreakable. What had begun as Jasmine against Trump had transformed into something larger, a battle of one man against a tide too strong to stop. And for the first time, Donald Trump looked small. The chamber was no longer his stage. It had become his trial. And America, watching live, was the jury. The air in the chamber was already heavy, every breath strained, every heartbeat loud enough to be felt. The storm of documents, testimonies, and confrontations had battered Trump from every angle. But still he sat there, clinging to his denial like a life raft in a sinking sea. Then Jasmine moved. Her steps echoed across the polished floor, slow, deliberate, like a drum roll leading to a final blow. She carried nothing in her hands, only a flash drive, no larger than a thumb, yet heavy enough to tilt the course of history. She nodded to the committee staffer. A click. The speakers crackled, and then his voice filled the chamber. Trump's voice, unmistakable, unedited, undeniable. The recording began in mid-conversation. Trump's tone was casual, almost smug. Keep it quiet. No one needs to know. Shift the money, reroute it through the shell accounts, make it clean, and for God's sake, don't leave a trail. If this gets out, I'll burn every one of you. The sound of laughter followed, his laughter, chilling, arrogant, damning. The chamber froze. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of the words and refused to let them go. Senators who had spent years defending him stared, mouths half open. Some shook their heads slowly, as though refusing to believe their own ears. Others dropped their eyes, ashamed. The journalists stopped scribbling. Cameras stopped moving. The world had stopped breathing. And Donald Trump sat there, color draining from his face, lips parted in shock. His eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, but there was none. This was no longer about spin, or party loyalty, or media bias. This was his voice, his orders, his corruption, caught in its purest, rawest form. A silence deeper than any that had come before settled over the room. Even the protesters outside fell quiet, as if the echo of his words had seeped through the stone walls. Then Jasmine spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Each word was delivered with the precision of a blade, sharp, deliberate, unflinching. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a rumor. This is not a headline. This is the sitting president of the United States using his office to cheat, to steal, and to threaten. Her gaze cut to Trump, piercing. Mr. Trump, these are your words, no one else's. Your voice, your orders, your crimes. And today, before this chamber, before this nation, you stand exposed. Gasps broke the silence, followed by murmurs that swelled like a rising tide. But Jasmine didn't stop. You call this a witch hunt, but no witch hunt leaves behind your own voice as evidence. You call this fake news, but no fabrication captures the rhythm of your breath, the sound of your laugh, the weight of your greed. She stepped closer to the table, her shadow falling across him. You built an empire on intimidation. You built a presidency on lies. But here, in this chamber, there is no stage left to stand on, only the truth. And the truth, Mr. Trump, is that you have betrayed this nation. Her words cracked like thunder. The room erupted. Some shouted in fury, some cheered with relief, others simply wept, overwhelmed by the gravity of it all. The noise was deafening, yet somehow Jasmine's voice lingered above it, searing into the conscience of every listener. Trump tried to speak, but nothing came. His lips trembled, his throat tightened. For a man who had always weaponized words, silence was now his prison. Sweat dripped down his temple. His hands shook. He looked less like a president and more like a cornered man awaiting judgment. Jasmine, steady and resolute, delivered the final blow. You once said you could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose support, but today America heard you pull the trigger. On truth, on honor, on the very people you swore to serve, and no amount of shouting will erase it. The chamber roared, a tidal wave of voices crashing into one another. Reporters scrambled, headlines already forming, history already being written. Trump sat motionless, hollow-eyed, the walls closing in, and Jasmine Crockett, her voice ringing through the storm, stood as the embodiment of unyielding justice. The climax had been reached, the mask had been torn away, and the world, every single viewer, every single citizen, knew there was no going back. The silence that followed the recording was shattered by a roar. Trump pushed back from his chair, his face flushed crimson, his fists slamming against the table. The man who had sat stunned moments ago now erupted with fury, spitting words like fire. This is a sham, a disgrace, a political hit job orchestrated by liars and traitors. His voice cracked through the chamber like a whip, jolting his supporters into a frenzy. Some leapt to their feet, pounding on desks, chanting his name as if their defiance alone could drown out the evidence that had just burned across the speakers. "Stand up," Trump bellowed, pointing toward them, veins bulging in his neck. "Stand with me. Don't let them steal your voice. This is not justice. This is tyranny." The chamber convulsed. Shouts collided, insults hurled across the aisle. "Shame!" thundered from one side, while cries of "Fight back!" erupted from the other. It no longer felt like a hearing. It felt like the spark of a riot. Security surged forward, weaving through the chaos. Plainclothes officers and Capitol Police raised their arms, urging order, placing hands on trembling shoulders to keep tempers from igniting into violence. But the air was electric, volatile, a single shout away from breaking. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She stood tall, the storm swirling around her gaze locked on Trump as if she could pin him to the earth with nothing but her eyes. When she spoke, her voice cut through the chamber with startling clarity, each word precise, deliberate, heavy as iron. Every outburst, every insult, every desperate denial, it changes nothing. The truth is carved into the record now. Your voice has condemned you. Her words landed like hammer strikes, each one slamming deeper, sealing the cracks in the edifice Trump had tried to rebuild with rage. He snarled back, pointing at her, his finger trembling. "You're a fraud, a disgrace to this country. You think you're strong? You're nothing without the circus behind you." But Jasmine didn't yield. Her tone sharpened, unrelenting. "You call this a circus? But the only clown here is the man who thinks he can scream louder than the truth." The chamber gasped. Even those who opposed her couldn't ignore the force of her defiance. Trump lunged forward, shouting again, but his words were drowned in the tidal wave of noise crashing through the room. The hearing was dissolving into chaos, supporters pounding desks, opponents chanting back, the sound of fists on wood, the scrape of chairs, the sharp whistles of security trying to restore order. The galleries erupted too, spectators shouting, some waving signs, others booing, fists raised as the chamber shook under the weight of clashing voices. The chaos spilled into the hallways, where crowds watching on monitors echoed the uproar, pounding on walls, chanting like an army ready to march. For a moment, it seemed the walls of democracy themselves might crack, but Jasmine held. She lifted her chin, shoulders squared, and spoke again, measured, powerful, resolute. "History is watching. Every second of this spectacle is being recorded, and long after your shouting fades, long after your rage is forgotten, the truth will remain. You cannot bury it. You cannot shout it down. You cannot run from it." Her words rolled through the chamber like a bell tolling in the night, silencing enough voices that the frenzy began to splinter. Some of Trump's allies shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and the weight of reality pressing down. Trump's chest heaved. Sweat ran in rivulets down his temples. His hands shook, clutching the edge of the table as though the ground beneath him were slipping away. He tried again to rally, but this time his voice cracked. His words tangled in fury. I will not let you." But the force had drained from him. The bluster was fraying. The chairman's gavel slammed once, twice, 3 times. "Order!" he thundered. His voice rose above the wreckage of shouts, above the chaos threatening to explode into violence. "Order in this chamber!" The pounding quieted, though murmurs still rippled like aftershocks. Security tightened its ring, hands ready on radios, eyes sharp for any sign of a spark reigniting. At the center of it all, Trump seethed, cornered yet unbroken, still glaring daggers across the room. Jasmine stood unshaken, her breathing steady, her hands clasped before her like steel. The chairman raised his hand again, voice cutting across the silence now hanging heavy over the chamber. This hearing will proceed. There will be silence as I prepare to deliver the findings. And with that, the storm held its breath. The nation leaned closer. The verdict was coming. The gavel struck once more. The chamber hushed, every heartbeat sinking to the slow rise of the chairman as he adjusted his glasses, eyes sweeping over the restless hall. This committee, he began, his voice solemn and deliberate, has reviewed the evidence, heard the testimonies, and witnessed the conduct before us. And this chamber, as well as the nation, has seen what cannot be unseen. His words carried the weight of centuries, as though the very foundations of the Republic were speaking through him. The facts, he continued, are undeniable. The truth has been laid bare. The words rang out like a verdict etched in stone. No embellishment, no flourish, just clarity. For a moment, there was silence. And in that silence, Donald Trump sat motionless, his head lowered, shoulders heavy, his face shadowed beneath the unforgiving blaze of cameras. The man who had filled the chamber with his thunder now seemed smaller, his hands clenched tight against the table, as though gripping the remnants of power slipping away. The flash of cameras painted him in harsh light, every twitch, every grimace frozen for history to dissect. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett lifted her chin. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the fierce gleam of vindication. She stood like a warrior at the end of a long, brutal battle, not unscathed but unbroken, her victory carved into the air itself. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply stood, tall and unyielding, her silence louder than any triumphal cry. Around her, murmurs swelled. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras whirred, and senators leaned into whispered exchanges. The world had shifted again, and everyone knew they were standing inside a moment that would be replayed for generations. Then the chamber erupted. Half the room surged into applause, cheers, pounding fists, voices rising in celebration. The other half erupted in outrage. Shouts of betrayal, accusations of bias, fists slammed against wood in protest. Security tightened once more, eyes scanning for sparks, but the storm had already broken beyond these walls, because outside the world was exploding. On news networks, anchors gasped live as the verdict echoed across screens. Social media convulsed, hashtags flooding in real time, millions typing, arguing, cheering, crying. In bars, in living rooms, on city streets, people leaned closer to televisions and phones, their faces lit by the glow of history in motion. Some cheered Jasmine's name, raising fists, calling her a defender of truth. Others clung desperately to Trump's defiance, branding him a martyr, crying out about conspiracies. The divide deepened, but the scale of the moment was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett had struck a blow that could not be erased. Inside the chamber, the chairman's gavel fell again, calling for calm, though few could hear it over the thunder of voices. He declared the hearing adjourned, but it was clear. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of an aftershock that would rattle through the foundations of power. Jasmine gathered her papers, her hands steady. She moved deliberately, each step echoing in the chamber, now buzzing like a hive. Trump remained seated, his face hidden in shadow, photographers circling him like vultures, capturing the image of a man cornered. He muttered still, "Witch hunt, political hit job," but the words had lost their fire. They scattered in the air, hollow, drowned by the roar outside. And then she moved. Jasmine walked down the aisle, her head held high, the weight of the nation's gaze upon her. Every camera turned, every flash framed her not merely as a congresswoman, not merely as a politician, but as something larger, an emblem, a symbol forged in fire and fury. The doors swung open, and light poured in. She stepped into it, bathed in brilliance, her silhouette captured in frames that would define her legacy. A woman walking out of battle, upright, radiant, the embodiment of justice refusing to bow. In that instant, America saw more than a verdict. It saw a vision, fragile, contested, yet powerful, of what truth could look like when spoken without fear. The world erupted again. cheers and protests, chants and cries, all colliding in the great messy chorus of democracy. But above it all, her figure remained fixed in the collective imagination, luminous against the storm. The hearing had ended. The battle was won. But the war for the soul of a nation was only beginning. And Jasmine Crockett, warrior, witness, symbol, had become its flame. In the end, this story was never just about two voices colliding in a chamber. It was about the timeless struggle between truth and deception, courage and fear, justice and the weight of power. We are reminded that integrity is not loud, but steady, that real strength is not in domination, but in refusing to bow when the truth is threatened. And if one flame can light the darkness, then each of us carries the power to protect what is right. No matter how fierce the storm, if this battle shook you, don't just move on. Reflect on it. Share it. Let it start a conversation that matters. Like, comment and pass it to someone who still believes justice deserves defenders. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where power is questioned and silence is never safe. Turn on the bell, because the next chapter won't be polished. It will be raw, it will be real, and it might just change the way you see courage. This is a dramatization born from real patterns of injustice and real acts of defiance. Any resemblance to actual figures or events is symbolic, meant for reflection, critique, and awakening. Thank you for watching. Truth is not given, it is fought for. This is Harrison Stories.